We welcome Rod Suskin back today.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Last time we spoke about the rising sign, your sun sign, where the moon was at the time and date and place of your birth. But talk to me a little bit more about the houses.
Well, all those planets and signs represent human archetypes and our shared experience. But it's still slightly impersonal. So what brings it to you is what we call the houses. And the houses are really the actual sky, not even the stars, the actual sky that we see the sun and the clouds and everything in, also measured and divided up the way astrologers do. So it changes very quickly.
That's 12 houses.
It's 12 houses.
Why 12?
Well, astrology is based on an idea that the cosmos is 12-sided. It's called a dodecahedron. And it's because of the patterns of nature. In the simplest way I could explain that, there are 4 seasons, and this is determined by nature. There are 4 seasons, and each one has 3 states. Early spring, spring, late spring. So there are 3 states. There's initiating, there's stable, and there's changing to the next thing. So 3, 4s, or 12. So everything in nature can be shown in ancient philosophy to work on that principle of 12 and 12 signs of the zodiac. And so the 12 houses then follow that pattern and are worked out the same way. But they're very local to your place and time of birth. They change very quickly, so they're very unique to you. And they what give you the context of your life, your relationship. So Mars.
Please tell us the different houses and what
So,
they are.
for example, obviously the first one everyone asked about is the relationship house.
Not me.
So everyone's got Mars, and Mars could represent something that's difficult, but some person might have it in the house of relationships and another one in the house of money. So the houses give us the personal context which changes things. So there's a house for the body, there's a house for money and everything that goes along with it. There's a house for your siblings and the people around you and your neighbors, because obviously a lot of the trouble comes from them. There's a house for your home and family and father. There's one for your children and the things and people that you love. There's one for disease and for the effect of giving our energy to others. They used to call it the house of slavery.
Giving our energy to others.
Yeah, where we give our energy without giving anything back. It was slavery. House of relationships. There's a house of death and also handling other people's resources, which is really used to mean the spouse's money. Very, very practical always.
Right.
Then there's the house of travel and study. There's the house of profession, which is the 10th one. The 11th house, which is the house of friends and groups and ideals, where we try and live our best self. And then there's the house of loss and sorrow and what's called self-undoing.
Right.
Which is really interesting, especially for ancient times. One of the great ancient astrologers was consulted by a woman who said, this woman has moved up the road and she's put witchcraft on me, and you check the chart and this is why I'm sick. And it's fascinating to read. People, practiced witchcraft and believed in witchcraft. And it's fascinating to read the ancient writers saying, actually, when you look at the fact that this is the house of self-undoing, you can usually assume that if someone says witchcraft, they're bringing something upon themselves.
Right.
And that's wisdom that we would understand.
If you've not seen the first episode, please watch it so that you can be clear that astrology is not equal to witchcraft or satanic rituals or the devil or anything.
It's clearly a way of understanding ourselves. And that's where his wisdom says, don't look outside. It's the person. We do things to ourselves, and it's about her jealousy or her fear of her neighbor. And so he tries to find a solution where she can actually accept her neighbor.
Right. But you don't have, each house wouldn't necessarily have any planet in it. So if you can just explain, sometimes it's a balanced chart and an unbalanced chart.
Every house has what we call a ruler. So everyone has all 12 houses represented, but just differently.
Yeah.
So some people might have 1 or 2 houses very strongly emphasized, and their life seems to concentrate only around those things, or where most of the stuff happens. Never rains, it pours. Some people have it very spread out, so they either are very balanced or they feel a bit like a jack of all trades and they don't know where to go.
Right.
Again, the astrologer will help them.
But what I'm saying is when you're looking at the chart that you hand out once a person's been for a reading, you can see that there are planets within some of those houses.
Yes.
Some are compacted in 1 or 2, 3 houses, and some are more spread out. So what does that mean?
Well, there isn't a general meaning for that. It'll vary depending on what the planets are. It's normal. I mean, there are only We look at 7 to 10 planets, depending on what you count as a planet, and there are 12 houses. So automatically
You
you're
can't
have
have
empty
a
ones.
planet in every house.
Exactly.
So if your relationship house is empty, that's not looking good for you
No,
for
no,
marriage.
I would say it's actually better. You don't want anyone interfering. Everyone's got a relationship house and everyone's got a ruler of it, a planet in charge of it. So as long as it's simple and there's just one planet in charge of it, probably your odds are good that everything will be relatively smooth.
Right.
Whereas as soon as there's a lot of drama going on, lots of other planets in there, there's lots of things to sort out. You know, you're talking about when you see houses with lots of stuff in them. I always say it's like when you put 5 people in a lift. If you're alone in a lift and one person comes in, you'll make a joke, you'll talk about the weather, and then you each go your own way.
Yes.
But if there are 5 people, everyone will act as if there's no one else there because it's too much to negotiate. And so that happens when the planets all clump together in houses.
Right.
There's too much to negotiate, and it becomes a long, slow process to figure it out.
Right.
So generally we like balanced and clear and simple, but life would be boring. And so most of us aren't balanced and clear and simple.
So example, what does Mercury in your first house generally mean?
So Mercury in your first house would be, Mercury is the planet of the mind and of speech and words and things like that. So most people with Mercury in the first house will process everything through their mind. Nothing makes sense to them unless they can rationalize it. They're thinking about it all the time. They don't just accept things intuitively or emotionally or things like that. They've got to make sense of it. They also usually have very good verbal skills because they express themselves through Mercury. Because the first house is yourself, so they'll seem like Mercury. They'll be talkative, they'll be intellectual, they'll need lots of mental stimulation. And sometimes Mercury is also the trickster. So they'll also be a person who changes rapidly and does different things. But it's very much focused around conscious mind. I sometimes think too much Mercury when it's in the first house.
Right.
You know, Western cultures loves the mind a little bit too much. That's Mercury in the first.
So for example, when you have a spouse, I think it's unethical to do a reading on someone else, but you would never do that though. Hey, you would never do a reading on a child or on a spouse for somebody. They need to be there themselves with their consent.
Yeah, the general rule that most astrologers will follow, that I do, is for anyone over, say, 12 years old, I won't do their chart unless they are the ones who request it or explicitly give permission. Certainly for other adults. So people come with marital problems. If only one partner chooses to come, then I'll get the information that I need from that one partner's chart because their marriage will still be in there and I don't have to invade the privacy of the spouse.
So you can see the spouse in the chart.
Because they've got a house of marriage.
Right.
So we can see it there. But we're seeing it through this person's eyes, which is what's relevant to them.
Correct.
So it's fine. We don't have to invade the privacy of the spouse like that.
But one would need to be a bit guarded when it comes to your place and date and time of your birth.
Yeah, you kind of would because of that ethic. And then with children, when it's small children, you know, that obviously we don't need their permission, but the focus of the reading is different. We don't say to the parent, this is the kind of relationship they're going to have, push them into medical school, they'll be good at medicine, none of those things. We really just show them how to recognize the child's own personality and being so they can nurture that instead of trying to push them one way or another.
What if your child has a terminal condition?
Well, usually, you know, the one kind of saving grace, most people who would come to an astrologer in that situation already know and have already been dealing with that. And that's what I often have to tell my students is that mostly you don't have to be afraid because people come to you because of something. It's not the first person that's going to tell them.
But would you tell them if the child is under 12?
Yeah, if the child is under 12, so we'd have to open the arrangements, the conversation. So I'd start off by telling them that the classical signs of weakness are in the chart that are physical weakness. In the olden days, that was very threatening to life and limb. In modern times, it isn't so much anymore. But I will say, you know, so has the child been sickly as a child? And they'll probably say yes, it's very likely.
Sure.
And that usually opens the conversation enough. In my case, fortunately, you know, my first degree was in psychology, so I'm sensitive to how to talk to people. But it's important that astrologers learn that too. So the general process, you're never supposed to cause any harm. You're never supposed to give any information that will hurt someone.
So you can't say when this person's going to die?
No. And in the case of when someone's going to die, my teacher taught me that even if they ask, you don't tell them, because they probably don't really want to know.
But you do give a kind of a
Yeah,
potential
exactly. And
life
also the
expectancy.
conversation will help us. So if they're really expecting someone to die, whatever, and sometimes, people come and say, my poor so-and-so has been sick for 3 years, we really, it's been draining us, the family, them, what does the bigger picture look like? You can't say precisely when, but you can see the window periods when it's most sensitive. So it's all just constantly checked against the client as to what information is safe to tell them. It's important not to lie. So we can't say, oh no, the child's fine.
Sure.
But we can say, we do it on an as-needed basis. So we can say, look, I can see a lot of that weakness. Have you been treated? What treatment have you received?
But if
I
they
can see
ask
the
you about
difficulties.
the child, is my child going to live through this year?
Luckily, I don't think anyone actually asked me that question, but I would answer in probabilities.
Right.
And or put it in a way that says like, well, generally with a chart like this, we think it not very likely. It does look very challenging, but there's most likely some room for a bit of wiggle room because very few karmas are absolutely solid. Right from the most ancient idea of what karma
We need
was.
to talk about karma versus dharma, please.
We do.